Tucked away in the mountains of Snowdonia, Bodnant Garden is among the National Trust's most spectacular properties. It's a work of art, crafted over the course of a century by generations of gardeners. But in recent times, visitor numbers have declined and costs escalated. The garden has been neglected and some of its plants have become old and tired.
You can see what we've got here. The problem is, very old plants planted probably, late 1920s, perhaps just at the early 30s. In very compacted soil now around them. The plants are sort of built up on these little mounds where the soil around them has been perhaps hoed and raked off over the years. So, each year they struggle a little bit more.
Troy Scott Smith, the head gardener, is struggling to preserve a collection that is not properly documented. It contains many plants that no one can even identify.
The garden, if nothing else, is a collection of plants. So, like if you were at a museum, you'd want to have an inventory of what you've got. And of course, once we know that, then it's crucial that we perpetuate those.
With little information, an ageing collection, and a very real threat from a new and devastating plant disease, Bodnant is facing the toughest conservation challenge in its history. There are literally thousands of plants in the garden whose identity is a mystery.
Something there? Just here.
Solving Bodnant's mysteries requires ingenuity. All new arrivals in the garden are labelled with a metal tag. Troy and his colleague Graham are using a metal detector to hunt for tags that disappeared long ago. This technique avoids having to dig indiscriminately.
It's a compromise between damaging the roots too much and finding something useful.
Troy has a massive job on his hands.
Yes, I think that's it. No, they wouldn't have been picking up that.
So we think there's about 50,000 different plants at Bodnant. And, we've got lots which, unfortunately, the labels have been lost over the years. They get knocked off with animals or gardeners working, or the metal snaps and it drops down. And it's very easy to be buried under the leaf litter.
The records of Bodnant's plant breeding activities have been lost. So often, Troy has to examine the plants themselves.
This one has stumped us for a number of years. We have a clue as to its parentage, looking at the flower type and the leaf, and I can show you other plants where I think some of its blood may come from. So that's something that we do, and we can look up books and see which plants have been bred from those ones. But it just takes time, It might take us several years to identify this one plant, and we've got 25,000 others to do as well. So, well, I don't think there's anything here of interest.
No luck with the label this time. But they'll keep looking, because they know how vital it is to build up a proper understanding of the plants they have here. At the heart of the garden is a unique collection of rhododendrons, one of the great glories of Bodnant. Many of the most famous names in plant hunting history are linked to this collection. They sent rhododendrons here from the four corners of the earth. But what makes the collection truly unique are the hybrids. From the 1920s, Bodnant's gardeners created hundreds of new varieties of rhododendron.
And it's a significant feat. To make 300 plus plants that were named and registered must have meant many thousands of rubbish ones. A dedication really with the head gardeners and the owners. And so it really is vital that these plants are protected, because if they are lost, then they're lost forever.
The garden was given to the National Trust in 1949, but Bodnant Hall is still a family home.
Yes, of course it is.
So perhaps the pheasants rather like saffron.
Michael McLaren and his mother, Lady Aberconway, share the family passion for the garden, especially its famous rhododendrons.
But your favourite is the Silpenensis, is it?
Well, of this lot, yes. I love it because it's one of the most delicate early ones, and I love the as you were saying, the pink, purple and fading into pale as pink.
Michael manages the garden for the National Trust, and this place is in his blood. His grandfather, Henry McLaren, the second Lord Aberconway, had a huge role in shaping the garden as it is today.
My grandfather, of course, had largely created the place in that he built the great terraces and he did all sorts of other things in the garden. It was a very exciting time, the tail end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, because lots of wonderful rhododendron seeds were coming out of China, and he supported financially some of these plant hunting expeditions. He got some of the seeds, as did a lot of other gardens, and there's great excitement of growing them on, seeing how they'd turn out. And so we've had a lot of rhododendrons in the garden here, and I think it's just something which the garden has become known for and which we're all passionate about.
Michael's father, Charles, was a leading industrialist.
Lord Aberconway, the chairman of John Brown's, leading Her Majesty.
His company, John Brown Shipyards, built the QE2.
May God bless her and all who fail in her.
As well as making waves in the business world, he was also at the helm of the British gardening establishment as president of the Royal Horticultural Society. Throughout the 20th century, the Aberconways indulged their passion for plants, especially rhododendrons, here at Bodnant. The technical expertise was supplied by their head gardeners, remarkably all members of the same family, the Puddles.
Well, starting with Fred Puddle, he was there from 1920 to 1947, and he was very skilled and enthusiastic about propagation, particularly rhododendrons, hybridizing rhododendrons.
And the tradition was continued by Fred's son, Charles Puddle, and his grandson, Martin.
I think a lot of what one sees out in the garden is down to the Puddle family as well as to my father and grandfather.
Much of the knowledge built up by the Puddles and the Aberconways has disappeared. Michael's family papers are stored in these dusty old boxes. He's sceptical about their value to the garden, but he's willing to open them up on the off chance they might contain something useful.
So here you've got a wealth of archive material. We don't know what it is. My father said to me that it was all frankly boring stuff about 19th century business deals and so on. I don't actually know. No one's been through it. It's all a complete mess because we've had some dry rot over there and we haven't yet replastered. So some of the boxes are out there behind you. And I'd love someone to go through it and tell me what's here. I doubt actually there's going to be anything much about the garden in it. Otherwise, I'm sure my father would have cottoned onto it, and it'll be in the public domain. But who knows? There may be hidden gems.
It's a fantastic moment for Alison Clark and Fiona Braithwaite, the first Bodnant gardeners to be given access to the archive.
Oh my gosh, it's amazing. Amazing thing. I've got lists of Kingdom Ward here.
And within minutes of opening the first files, they've struck gold.
Oh my God, look at this. Wardian cases were brought back containing rhododendron cuttings, acorns and lily bulbs. But unfortunately, the rhododendrons were all withered.
What's this?
Kingdom Ward. Oh, amazing.
Frank Kingdon Ward was the Indiana Jones of plant hunters. The gardeners here have always known that there were links between Bodnant and some of his most important expeditions to the Far East. But this is the first time they've seen direct evidence like this, and such precise information about exactly which plants he and other plant hunters sent back.
Good, I've just found a letter. It's a Kingdom Ward expedition, and it's addressed to Harry. And of course, Harry was known in his family. It was Henry McLaren, but he was known as Harry. And they're asking for some more funds in the expedition of 1930.
It just sort of proves, all the money that they did invest and in the various of Kingdom Ward's expeditions.
Yeah.
Amazing stuff here, personal correspondence. Apart from Kingdom Ward, there's stuff from George Forrest, Reginald Farrer, Joseph Rock. The sheer historical importance of them is they're really valuable bits of information.
It's just very exciting and extraordinary, really, that they've still got the original papers. I think this is what a lot of people would like to get their hands on, because it is plant hunters, and that's what Bodnant's all about. It's all about the plants.
Well, there's so much unidentified plant material in the garden, and the starting point very often for identifying that is to know what came to the garden. Either it was purchased or it came from expeditions. So my job essentially is to marry up this information with the plants that are currently growing in the garden, so we know what we've got.
On the strength of these discoveries, Bodnant's managers are now exploring a way to open up this historical treasure trove and use it to improve the garden. Troy seems to be winning the battle of plant identification, but a new fight is just beginning with a devastating plant disease.
Gardens are works of art, you know, it's an historic garden, it's a listed garden. You know, we could very easily lose the special character of the garden if we have to lose 20, 30, 50, 80% of our mainstay collection. And also, you know, we're losing plants potentially that are very rare. You know, we've got a good collection of plants here, and there may only be one of its kind. And if that's the one that gets Phytophthora, it's gone forever.
Phytophthora, or sudden oak disease, made the headlines 6 years ago.
A potentially devastating tree disease which has caused widespread damage in America has been discovered in trees here for the first time. The fungus has been spotted in 3 trees in Cornwall, a horse chestnut, an evergreen oak and a beech tree.
Phytophthora is the MRSA of plants. It affects the plants that are so important to the Bodnant collection, especially rhododendrons. Troy's afraid that he's found evidence of the disease, so he's called in Paul Barber, a government expert.
This is one of many that I was concerned about.
Right, okay.
I don't think it is typical what I know as the symptoms of Ramorum, but
no.
I mean, you'd be able to
obviously
advise
you've got some tip dieback, haven't you?
Yeah.
But I think you're quite right. I don't think it is typical of the disease, because
it's a relief for Troy. No infection is in this rhododendron, but just around the corner, a group of newly planted viburnums is causing concern.
If you can get him out, we'll just see if I can clean that back. That's pretty indicative of Phytophthora, because you've got this foxy reddy brown colour tracking back up the stem. That's very symptomatic, actually, that red brown colour.
Oh, yeah.
That's what it should look like,
yeah, very
in a green tissue there, and unfortunately we've got this indication that we've got Phytophthora tracking up from the root system into the plant and therefore killing the plant. But based on the fact that you had 16 of these plants when you bought them in, and you say that you've had 7 so far that have affected, and we just had another one there that we've taken as a sample, so that's half of them already. If that comes back as positive to quarantine Phytophthora ramorum, we'll expect you to remove the remaining plants.
2 or 3 metres, is it?
Yeah, but we'll expect you to remove the remaining plants because they're all of the same batch, and then destroy them by incineration.
Paul's fairly sure that these viburnums are affected. Phytophthora has arrived at Bodnant. As the year passes, the news gets worse. Phytophthora has been found in one of the rhododendrons, and Graham Jones and his fellow gardeners have been ordered to destroy it. Rhododendron ponticum is a natural host for Phytophthora, and it's very common here in Bodnant.
We have to incinerate it and remove everything that we've got. So for the rhododendron ponticum, it means a hell of a lot of work, because there's so much of it here. It just keeps on spreading. So this was about 20 foot high, and you can see the size of the area that we're having to clear here. When you look at the actual list, there's so many of the plants that we've got in this garden that could be a natural host, so they would take it on freely. So we just got to get rid of this ponticum while we can, really, and while it had, even the stuff that hasn't got it, we need to get rid of it before it spreads to the stuff that we don't want it to infect.
The great fear is that one day some of the much rarer plants will have to be consigned to the flames. Troy's determined to keep the disease at bay. He's on his way to Cornwall to get advice from one of the top UK experts. Ian Wright is a National Trust advisor on Phytophthora, which has devastated Trengwainton gardens.
I think it's been a challenging time. The disease was first found and identified in 2005, which is actually fairly recent here. And since that, we have had to actually deal with a number of losses. But I feel that we've actually kind of turned a corner. Rather than being reactive, we started to become proactive towards our responses towards it. So that's hopefully what I can share with you today.
In a collection packed with rare species, Trengwainton has been forced to destroy diseased plants, leaving scars and bare patches. But it's not just infected plants that they're removing.
Coming through here, you can see this rather large gap that we've actually got now. And this was where it was an enormous Drimys winteri. Yeah, absolutely. And we took the difficult decision to actually take this out based on the research from the Central Science Laboratory that told us that Drimys was one of the major spore-producing plants that there actually is. So to protect the other things like the Magnolia campbelli, out it came.
Trengwainton has been proactive by removing high-risk plants before they pose a threat to the collection. Phytophthora can spread in many different ways and is almost impossible to stop. Troy's wondering what the implications are for the paying public.
What's the process and your thought process with the visitors and their interaction with the disease, and what we're actually telling them about it?
Well, we've been very open actually about the disease, and I think awareness and education is as much of a part of it as the kind of cut and burn that we've actually had to do as well. And really educating people, because they can play their part in how we manage this just as much as we can.
I mean, I went to some Scottish gardens and we had to walk through footpaths to actually get into the garden. Is that something that we're thinking of doing in the Trust?
I think this sort of whole footbath scenario isn't perhaps the right message, and it actually doesn't work very well. The sort of global world that we live in now, this won't be the end of the pests and diseases that come to actually challenge us, but, you know, perhaps we need to focus on the opportunities and become proactive rather than reactive, and that's the way to actually move forward.
It's been a thought-provoking trip for Troy, but it's not all doom and gloom.
I think we have to think of it as an opportunity, and I think, you know, gaps like this, not necessarily bad. You know, you're creating views through to the countryside, you're thinking about introducing new plants now because you've got spaces to do that. We often think on large gardens, space is endless, but I'm short of space at Bodnant and I've got so many plants I want to bring in. So yeah, you know, an enjoyable visit, lessons to learn Phytophthora-wise, but lots of positives I think to take back as well.
Disease is one challenge, but there are other challenges for Bodnant's conservation team.
Great view here, Alison, of the house.
Troy and Alison are on their way to take cuttings from a rhododendron called the Mikado, a stunning pink when it's in bloom. The Mikado has proved impossible to propagate by normal methods, and they've decided it needs special treatment to save it.
Okay, look, this is it.
This big one here.
Yeah, that's the one.
What a lovely bark that has.
It's gorgeous, isn't it? Yeah.
That's a nice plant.
And pretty old too.
Yeah.
As far as I know, it's the only one in the garden.
Is it?
So
Yeah. How are we going to get material wherever...
Alison is Bodnant's taxonomist, with responsibility for identifying and propagating the plants in the garden. She and Troy have selected the Mikado for a process called micro-propagation.
It's split and it's not got...
I try all of the plants from cuttings. If I don't get a result from cutting, then we've got to look at another method of propagating them. So the micro-propagation is a good technique.
Micro-propagation is not something that can be done in the average potting shed.
Always nice coming into the glass house, Alison.
Yeah.
Some lovely babies.
See what we've got there.
Which ones are these?
These are the pengerins.
They are preparing to send them to a high-tech laboratory in Cornwall.
It's kind of like IVF for plants, and that's a fairly good explanation. They're sort of test tube plants. Basically, they take just a few cells from what we call the apical meristem, which is the very tip of the plant there. And just from those few cells, they can grow whole plants. And I think there's something like an 80% success rate, though. So fingers crossed. Hopefully in a couple of years' time, I should be getting my babies back.
This is the last chance saloon for the Mikado. It's the micro-propagation laboratory at Duchy College in Cornwall. The process isn't cheap. It costs £1,000 per plant. Bodnant's cuttings are being treated with the help of a grant from the Royal Horticultural Society. It's now 6 months since Troy and Alison packed off their cuttings, and they've come to Duchy College to get a progress report from Ros Smith, the scientist in charge of micropropagation.
Oh, hello. Nice to meet you.
Good to see you.
Yeah, Alison.
Hi, Ros. How are you?
Fine, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, what's this?
Yeah, some little babies coming on. It's just
Wow.
starting to develop.
So you're pretty pleased here with the success of ours? Or?
Yes, initially it was a bit difficult to actually get contaminant-free material from those buds.
The sterile conditions of the lab are vital to success.
So when we get any plant material, whether it's a shoot or whether it's a flowering, a bud, we've got to clean the outside with a bleach solution, otherwise we have lots of contamination coming in. But once we've done that, we can either take the vegetative buds or we can use the flower buds and regenerate from some little shoots, which will then grow on into big plants.
The plant cells have been grown on in pots of nutrient jelly. And after 6 months of careful nurturing, there's a result.
Is each one of those, is that
it's a
gonna be
potential plant.
Potential plant?
Yes, yes,
Wow.
in 2 years' time approximately.
It's
yeah.
amazing you can get that much from one little piece of material, isn't it?
Yes.
So, Ros, sort of 2 or 3 years down the line, we'll be getting some plants back, and
Yes,
you
yes,
know,
yes.
sort of 30, 40 plants,
Yeah,
hopefully from each one.
Hopefully, yes, we should
And,
be able to do quite nicely and produce quite a lot, I think. The way things
Yeah.
are going, they're looking very promising.
Sounds so easy.
Yeah.
Well, it's straightforward if you know what you're doing.
So the prospects for Bodnant's Mikado rhododendron are good. Lady Aberconway has a very personal relationship with Bodnant Garden.
These oak trees I grew from acorns on my dressing table many years ago for my grandchildren. That's my grandson Angus, who's now nearly 21. That's my granddaughter Arabella Onslow, who's very old, and she's a doctor now. And then through there's another one, which Iona McLaren planted, and Hamish's is down there. But there was another one which got eaten by a rabbit, but I'm growing another one on. That's for my granddaughter Charlotte. I think it's very good for children to see things growing, and, you know, a tiny little acorn turns into a great big oak tree.
When the Aberconway family gave Bodnant to the National Trust 60 years ago, they handed over control of the garden. However, Michael McLaren manages Bodnant on an unpaid basis, because the Trust invited him to do so.
My family have no right for the future to be involved. If we want to be involved in the future, we need to be able to show that we can still put something into the place. When my father died, they had a choice as to whether or not to appoint me. They had no legal obligation to appoint me. And I think they appointed me because they knew that I knew something about horticulture, they knew that I was very enthusiastic about gardening, and they knew that I was passionate about Bodnant. And so they thought that I could have a useful role to play here. I think I do. I hope they agree.
There's no getting away from the McLarens' deep links with Bodnant, in life and death. Lady Aberconway not only plants trees for her grandchildren, she is also the guardian of the mausoleum where her family is buried. It was built in the 1880s in a secluded part of the garden and is currently being restored.
I'm sad you can't see the tablet that I've had done for my husband. It looks lovely. My mother-in-law has a tablet there, my father-in-law, and of course the first Lord and Lady Aberconway. And there's a space for me, if anyone could think of anything to say.
Even as the restoration work continues on the mausoleum, Lady Aberconway comes here regularly to pay her respects.
I always do fresh flowers every time I'm here, and I have these little plants at the side, and that's my husband's sarcophagus there, and on the other side is his father. It's a lovely, peaceful place to be buried, I think, and the sound of water, and I think it's lovely. But I should be glad when all this is gone.
I mean, you just look around at Bodnant, you can see the sense of history, the amount of time that the garden has been here. You know, you don't get trees like this. You see magnolias behind me, you know, 60, 70, 80 years old. Yeah, I'm fully confident Bodnant's going to be here for another 100, 200 years. And the way I think about the garden is I plant for the future. It's a real challenge because it's not easy thinking years ahead, but it's also a great privilege and one that, you know, I absolutely love.
Tucked away in the mountains of Snowdonia, Bodnant Garden is among the National Trust's most spectacular properties. It's a work of art, crafted over the course of a century by generations of gardeners. But in recent times, visitor numbers have declined and costs escalated. The garden has been neglected and some of its plants have become old and tired.
You can see what we've got here. The problem is, you know, very old plants planted probably, you know, late 1920s, perhaps just at the early 30s, in very compacted soil now around them. The plants are sort of built up on these little mounds where the soil around them has been perhaps hoed and raked off over the years. So, you know, each year they struggle a little bit more.
Troy Scott Smith, the head gardener, is struggling to preserve a collection that is not properly documented. It contains many plants that no one can even identify.